So which is better, Maliss or Ryzeal? Let's start with some gameplay of both decks. Starting with Maliss, you will see in this replay, Maliss doesn't care about hand traps, can combo through all types of disruptions, and of course, end on an amazing board with a lot of disruptions as well as like 9 cards in hand by the time it's your turn again. So crazy follow up, really good combo with a lot of advantage, and plays through hand traps. Here's the Maliss Decklist. Now, onto some Ryzeal gameplay. Same as Maliss, Ryzeal does extremely well through hand traps. Because all of its starters are also extenders, most Ryzeal monsters just summon themselves from your hand for free. Ryzeal generally sets up more disruptions than Maliss. However, Unlike Maliss, if your board is broken, Ryzeal often relies on a top deck or on cross to draw cards for follow-up plays, so it has weak follow-up. But a very sticky board since Detonator not only detonates, but also protects itself. Here's the Ryzeal Decklist. Now for some analysis and final thoughts. So Maliss and Ryzeal, which is better? Let's discuss some advantages and disadvantages of both decks. For Maliss, as I said, this deck can play through most hand traps, except for Lancea of course, meaning Maliss has a clear counter which completely shuts them down. Ryzeal, on the other hand, doesn't have the same counter. There isn't one hand trap that completely shuts down Ryzeal. Yes, Max C and Fuelos hurt both decks, but both decks have minimal plays to end on a few disruptions under Fuelos and Max C. Ryzeal summons 2 bodies and makes Detonator, while Maliss makes Red Random and searches Mirror, which is also 2 disruptions. So we've established that there's a hand trap that shuts down Maliss while there isn't one for Ryzeal. Other than that, both decks have a lot of room for non-engine, generally playing between 15 and 18 hand traps or cards like Triple Tactics, meaning both decks are very solid going second, especially since Maliss plows through hand traps while all Ryzeal starters are also extenders. End boards are also similar in terms of number of disruptions. Maliss generally has 6 on board with like 2 or 3 hand traps since they draw 4 cards between 2 turns, while Ryzeal generally ends on around 8 disruptions on the field. But the difference is, Maliss has ton of follow-up. By the time it's turn 3, Maliss will have drawn 7 cards for free, alongside all the searches it does on both turns, meaning you'll have a full field, full grave, and 10 plus cards in hand for follow-up, guaranteeing an easy OTK. As for Ryzeal, it doesn't search for any follow-up while performing the main combo, so if the board is broken, they will depend on a top deck. However, that's only if the board is broken, because Detonator has build-in protection for XYZ including itself. Ryzeal also has cross, meaning it's also much better through Nibiru than Maliss, since Ryzeal can just easily negate Nibiru. So as a final judgment, with everything I've said, Maliss is actually better. Yes, it has a clear weakness in Lancea, but people have dropped Lancea because Ryzeal came out, so you won't see Lancea a lot. Yes, Ryzeal ends on more disruption, but nowhere near the advantage and follow-up that Maliss has. And also Maliss is simply better through hand traps, so for these reasons, Maliss gets the win on this one.